Monday, August the 21st.
Out most of the day. Had a long talk with Peter at dinner time. 20 people have paid their rent this week as opposed to 31 last week. Meanwhile, the number of residents has increased, and every day there are new faces to be seen in the corridors. There was a meeting at Nancy Kershaw's in the evening to discuss the question of outside support to the Belgrave Homeless Project, as the squat is officially called. I went there with Peter, Dave and Julian. Everyone in the squat had been invited. The meeting was also attended by a number of people who have helped the squat in various capacities and at various times since January. Nancy Kershaw, Liz Yates, Jean Steinhard, Bob Nind, Bob Webb, Eddie Pilkington, Rachel Webb, Michael Keane, Ian McGowan and 2 others from St Mark's and, to my surprise, Michael Francis. A large part of the meeting was basically a dialogue between Rachel Webb on the one hand and Peter and Dave on the other. Rachel is a councillor for Lambeth, very enthusiastic and very supportive of the squat. According to her, the council spends £12 million every year to put up 1,500 people in temporary accommodation, and no one denies that we're doing the council a favour by keeping up to 200 others off their lists. Peter added that Lambeth Council had recently opened a home for people with mental difficulties, with 8 residents and 6 staff members. Rachel has good hopes that the council will agree to help with fixing the roof, installing showers, switching on the electricity, etc. How long all this will take is entirely another matter. Julian mentioned that 65% of the residents of Belgrave suffer from depression or mental confusion of some kind. God knows how he worked out this magic figure, but I have to say that my own estimate is not far below. Julian expressed great anxiety about the fact that these people don't get any kind of treatment or support. One could feel that he was partly speaking for himself. He mentioned having been in psychiatric hospitals and dreading them, and others in the squat, including Marianne, having had similar experiences. Peter and Dave were particularly concerned about Marianne, who seems to have been feeling severely confused and extremely lonely since yesterday. Their sympathy was very genuine and profoundly moving. I was interested to hear Peter saying at one point that, nice and friendly as they are, the people of the Belgrave need a mother. An obvious self-reference. Was on gate duty again tonight. Lots of young people were streaming in and out until well after midnight, quite a few of them with bottles or cans. There was also a lot of pot smoking in the office by the gate. Pot smoking has always been tolerated by the squat. At least grass doesn't make you argumentative or violent, as alcohol often does. Around 2 or 3 in the morning I heard some loud talk and roaring thunder in the corridors, and it emerged later that a wild acid party had taken place. Sandy turned up late at night. She had been done for begging and spent 6 hours in the nick, but then was released without charge. Also late at night I saw a group of people standing on the pavement on the opposite side of the road, as if they were talking to each other in low voices. I was told that they were Christians praying about the evil that goes on in the squat.
Tuesday, August the 22nd.
I have a friend, John Claude, who runs a small vegetarian restaurant near the Woolwich called The Cafe. Today the cafe was about to close for a holiday, and John Claude gave me tons of leftover food for the squat: rice, curry, salad and yoghurt. As I was coming out of the cafe in the early afternoon, loaded with sacks of grub, I bumped by some amazing coincidence into Richard, shirtless, dishevelled, his giant body dripping with sweat, looking like a woodman lost in the city. He'd walked all the way from the Belgrave to the Aldwych, huffing and puffing for 3 hours, struggling on his flat feet to get a birth certificate from St. Catherine House, because I had one, but the £1, the £1, the flaming pigs have got it. The same walk takes me 40 minutes, though I have to add that Richard came via London Bridge, which must have increased the overall distance by a factor of 2 or 3. I gave him a sack of food because I couldn't have carried everything back on my own, and he proceeded valiantly, reaching the squat another 4 hours later. He's quite unassuming about his flat feet, and even comments, What a shame! I could have joined the army and gone around the world blowing up villages. The evening saw a tragic scene which reminded me forcefully that there's something terribly serious and real life about this whole adventure. A little after dinner I heard sounds of panic from the kitchen. I rushed there and found Henrietta, a woman in her early 40s, lying on the floor in great pain. Her husband was at her side and there were lots of other people around. Henrietta and her husband looked like one of those pathetic couples that someone sometimes finds on the street, lovers who seem to have nothing to share but their misery and loneliness, without future, both alcoholics, often at loggerheads, but lovers all the same. Henrietta says that she's pregnant and she was suffering from terrible pains in her stomach. She's also very drunk, as was her husband, who mumbled words of comfort while helping her to smoke a cigarette. An ambulance was promptly called, and about 15 minutes later a nurse appeared in the kitchen. He asked Henrietta a few quick questions about where she had lived. "No, not here, I mean before," said the ambulance man. How long she had been pregnant, and a few other things. He was cross when she told him that she was 1 month pregnant, while her husband said 4 months, and seemed to find this irrefutable proof that she was not pregnant at all. When he asked her whether she wanted to go to the hospital and she said no, he jumped with visible relief at the opportunity and to conclude that there was nothing more he could do, and bade us farewell. There was some protest and great efforts to persuade Henrietta to change her mind, but the ambulance had already gone, leaving Henrietta on the floor in agony. It didn't take long to persuade her to change her mind. Clive called the ambulance again and gave them hell, as he described it, on the phone. Another 15 minutes and the ambulance was back with a different nurse who seemed much more caring and patient. Henrietta didn't resist this time and she was carted off with her drunk husband and Clive. Many tried to help and comfort, especially Marianne, who was in the kitchen all along, watching the scene with great compassion. But I have to say that the behaviour of Clive and Jason was particularly exemplary. About these two characters, I suspect that I shall have more to say before too long. Spent some time loafing at the gate in the evening. There was a young guy there called Adam, quite friendly, who had come down from Manchester and was stopping in London for a few days before going fruit picking in Kent. He had some money, and when Richard, who had missed the dinner after walking for 7 hours to the Aldwych and back, complained of being furiously hungry, Adam magnanimously stretched out a few coins and told him to get some chips for himself and the others assembled there. Me and Richard departed to the chip shop with Nick, a nice young man who looks like Jesus but was drunk beyond redemption. Nick kept crossing the road without taking any notice of the traffic, holding his chips tight, his long blonde hair floating in the wind. There was a bizarre conversation with Richard stammering words of caution and Nick retorting that Richard was wound up. I rambled along, wondering what this was all about.
Wednesday, August the 23rd.
At midday, I accompanied Adam to the DHSS, where he was going to sign on. On the way back, we saw Steve from a distance, a can in his hand, talking with a smile to a small middle-aged woman with a hunch on her back. Steve was also pointing his finger at us, and as we approached, I heard him assuring her that we would help her to walk to Kennington, because he was walking in the opposite direction himself. A few minutes later, I found myself walking with her at a snail's pace along Kennington Park, listening to the heartbreaking story of her life. Her name was Liz. She was suffering from terrible backaches. She'd been married 18 years and now suspected her husband, who also knocks her, of having another wife, and she is thinking of abandoning him. She had no friends. Friends are the most important thing in the world. Only 3 beloved kids. She must have been quite tipsy, judging by her breath. She clung to my arm as we crossed the road, and even more after that. She looked at the sun and the flowers in the park and said, "I wish people would live happily and in peace." When we reached her destination, she opened her purse and fumbled for a note, succeeding only in scattering coins all over the pavement. Finally, she managed to extirpate a £10 note from the purse and begged me to take it, to help someone else, as she put it. I stubbornly refused, and then she looked me in the eyes and implored several times with tears in her eyes, "Please, don't forget to help other people." I won't forget, Liz. The usual Wednesday evening meeting didn't take place today. Very few people turned up at the appointed time, and after waiting for a while, we decided to cancel the meeting. There was an atmosphere of despondency, with several fed-up faces around. It's the first time that a meeting has been cancelled since I came back. A disquieting development. I'm not sure that I fully understood why this happened. I suspect that is partly related to tension between Peter and Dave on one side and Pauline and Craig on the other. I've heard several criticisms of Peter and Dave by Pauline and or Craig. According to Peter, Pauline wants to become some sort of leader, and she claims she would sort a lot of things out. There was a squabble earlier in the day about who was going to chair the meeting, which I think relates to all this. I doubt there is nothing more to the cancellation of this meeting than the quarrel. The other part of this story is that there are ups and downs in the interest that people take in the life of the community. Participation is a fragile animal, partly because everyone's involvement depends a great deal on everyone else's. The other thing that worries me is that Og and Mel have come back today. Og was one of Tim Saylor's buddies, and he ruled the place for a while after Tim left. He casually mentioned today that he had come back to, as he put it, make the place work properly. He also made an oblique comment to the effect that Peter was too old and too weak to handle the job of collecting the rent. There's a rumour that at one stage Og controlled a bank account which contained money that had been collected in or donated to the squat, and he eventually disappeared with the money. Mel, also an earlier mate of Tim Saylor, is a much less subtle character than Og, a kind of bully boy. Richard calls him the dinosaur, huge body, small brain. He is the sort of person who has figured out who are his friends and who are his enemies, and is the most loyal comrade to the former, but a nuisance to the latter. He was barred early on for violence and sexual harassment. When I met him on the street a couple of weeks ago, he acknowledged it quite openly, but now he suddenly seems to have forgotten it. Later it turned out that in fact Mel had not really moved in. He kept paying us regular visits and boasting from time to time that he is going to take over soon, for our benefit of course, but never put those words into action. There are clouds on the horizon.
Thursday, August 24th.
Was out in the afternoon and came back for dinner. This is the time I always enjoy, when people sit in the common room, digging into their plates and chatting with each other. One of those moments when a sense of companionship seems to be binding this ragbag of battered humanity. It's also an opportunity to see the day's crop of new faces and make new friends. Today we've been joined by 2 young Turkish women and a German chap. At this time of year, our home is, among other things, a refuge to young travellers who badly need a place to stay. Most of them are very nice, and they add a colourful note to the tableau of the squat. Often they send us postcards from faraway countries, Germany, America, Greece, after returning home. Steve Hancock met someone in San Francisco who lived here for a while. Spent some time at the gate with Richard. I had a long talk with him about various social issues, and it really hit me that, notwithstanding his stammering and his manners of an idiotic giant, Richard had a fine and very thoughtful mind. The first glimpse of this came when he gave me a devastating but extremely articulate critique of the new system of turnstiles in the London Underground, how they're designed for profit and not safety, how they cause severe problems for women with children, etc. Then he gave me a lecture on the poll tax in the same vein. Sensing his political views, I asked him if he is an anarchist, and he said yes. And he proceeded to show me a variety of anarchist magazines that were crammed in the bag that he carries around, ready for display to the sympathetic listener. Apparently he has also been involved in various forms of direct action on issues such as the poll tax, a kindred spirit. Late in the evening we made another psychedelic trip to the chip shop, this time to escort Danny, a young boy of only 17 who had evidently taken acid and kept having fits of insane giggling.
Friday, August 25th.
The sunny weather of the last few weeks has suddenly given way to rain. This is perhaps why today's new recruits were not young travellers, but more traditional figures of the cardboard city type. Middle-aged men with worn-out faces, plastic bags, and often a pitiable tie to preserve a facade of dignity. One question which has intrigued me for some time is why those who live in places like the Bullring by Waterloo Station don't rush here in greater numbers. Many of those who live here, or who have lived here in the past, have come from those places, but there are many others left behind. Why don't they come? I asked this question today to one of those who had come from the Bullring. His answer was a bit cryptic, but some of it made a lot of sense. He pointed out, for instance, that in many respects people in the Bullring have better facilities than we have here, especially they're given a lot of free food, from the soup runs of the Simon community, the Hare Krishnas, the Salvation Army, etc., and they also have access to functioning toilets. A different idea was that they were afraid of leaving their cardboard box for a temporary squat, and then finding themselves on the street again a few weeks later. He also mentioned that the Belgrave squat had acquired a bad reputation, but he couldn't explain why it should have a worse reputation than the Bullring, where life seems to be much rougher and tougher. There must be other clues. One clue, which I was to only understand later, is that the Bullring too is in some ways a community, but that's a whole other story. In the evening I got drunk with Mark. Perhaps this is not a good idea, I don't know. But he invited me to share a bottle of wine, and I just thought, why not? It's hard to keep sober day after day with all of this booze coming in and out. He took me to his room, which was nicely arranged with carpets, curtains and posters, and we spent a couple of hours sipping wine. Thunderbird, a cheap American wine that is very popular here, partly because it is very strong. Listening to the Rolling Stones on the radio and chatting about this and that. Mark strikes me as a simple and good-natured fellow without great ambition, but aspiring positively to a pleasant and peaceful life. He was married once and then lived in the countryside for a while, growing vegetables and looking through the window on rainy days. Eventually he got bored, fell out with his wife and started drifting again. At the moment he survives on casual labour, earning enough to pay his rent, buy batteries for his radio and enjoy a smoke or a bottle from time to time. He wants to save up and then travel around America for a bit or move into proper accommodation. Like me and Richard, Mark does believe that the squat is a community in some basic sense. He has hopes for this place and thinks that it has a great potential, but he sees little hope of any kind of stability in its organisation, with people coming and going all the time. He's worried that Peter seems to be taking on too much, and I share his worries. Peter is very moody these days, often sighing about some problem or another. As I said, a lot of drink has been coming into the squat recently. It's our bad fortune that there is an off-licence just across the road, where a large sum of money must have been spent by the squatters since January. In fact, the owner of the shop is so delighted with our presence that he appears to have started giving free bottles of beer and wine to some of the good-looking young women of the squat. What amazes me is that the current lack of control and restraint about drinking seems to create so few problems. In the winter, we used to be extremely concerned about sticking to the rule of no drink on the premises under the conviction that allowing people to drink inside the house would be a recipe for disaster. But there's no trace of such disaster so far, either because the current members of the squat are particularly reasonable — we did have problems earlier with heavy alcoholics like Spider — or because our fears were exaggerated.
Saturday, August 26th.
Spent most of the morning trying to clean and fix the loos. At the moment we have 2 loos on the ground floor which were installed by Michael Davis himself a little while before I came. But whether as a result of what people throw in them or for other reasons, the drains are now blocked and the toilets are in a terrible mess. And it's a hopeless job to clear them. They'll fill up again in no time at all. In fact, the whole environmental situation in the squat is quite depressing. I think that we can boast of doing well with what we have, i.e. a couple of brooms and mops and a tap of cold water. And as I said, visitors are usually quite impressed by the general tidiness of the place. But with the loos in a state, the drains blocked and the garbage mounting rapidly in the backyard without any sign of anybody planning to pick it up in the near future, we could soon be buried in our own detritus like the cities of ancient times. The paralysis arising from the lack of cleaning equipment is extremely frustrating. This is only one aspect of the very heavy price we have to pay for our independence. There ought to be games in the common room, good food in the larder, paint and brushes to fill the building with colours. Instead, we camp here in conditions of siege, with no hot water, no loos, no electricity, and so few mugs that we have to take tea in turn. Not to mention a diet dominated by potatoes and scraps of meat. Many other people were helping with cleaning this morning. It cheered me up to see that Graham was himself energetically mopping in spite of his cynical view of the promises of cooperation. Today it was Nick's turn to show up with a black and swollen eye. I suspect that this is a result of an argument with Spike. Nick and Spike are great pals, but it seems that for one reason or another, Nick got on Spike's nerves. Later in the day, Nick said that he was leaving the place, and something to the effect that people were abusing his generosity. Whether he actually will go or not is another matter. He didn't.
Sunday, August 27th.
This morning the building nearly went up in flames. I wasn't there when it happened, but apparently one of the rooms on the 3rd floor caught fire and there was some chaos culminating with the arrival of the fire brigade. They were not too happy about it and said they would come on Tuesday to inspect the building. All this is worrying. We have already had several fires in the building. Only a couple of weeks ago, someone was apparently found drunk and solidly asleep in his room, surrounded by flames with a candle on the floor, and there will be more. The fire escapes are now open, but they lead on one side to a closed backyard with a 12-foot fence, and on the other side to a gate locked with a heavy chain. We have no firefighting equipment. We can't even afford a bucket of sand, let alone proper fire extinguishers. It's time we pulled ourselves together and did something about all this. In the way, the inspection of the fire brigade will be a blessing, as long as they don't request the evacuation of the building. Apart from minor events like this fire, Life goes on without major surprises at number 1 Clapham Road. In fact, this diary may give the impression that this week has been rather dull. This is partly because I've not been able to spend a great deal of time at the squat in the last few days, being involved in other activities. Many things may have happened in my absence that would have deserved a mention, but also we do seem to have reached some kind of equilibrium which allows life to go on in the manner of a gentle routine for the time being. With Peter and Dave taking care of the harder responsibilities, rent, collecting and cooking respectively, we can keep going for quite a while without great need for a meeting or arguments about living arrangements. And so far, Og and Mel have not caused the least trouble. This gentle routine, however, brings its daily harvest of small joys and dramas. Someone's birthday is being celebrated, a love poem on the wall, songs erupting in the kitchen, an exchange of political views keeping people awake, Mr. Jolly going around with colourful rags around his neck, looking like Jimi Hendrix and being affectionately greeted by everyone, Steve coming home with an abandoned puppy, Marianne saying that she found a poor sod sleeping on the street and brought him back to the squat. Eddie seeing Richard work like a dog and telling him, "Do yourself a favour, son, sit down and have a cup of tea," and then extracting a biscuit from his pocket and giving it to Richard with a wink. The treasures of this place lie not so much in its history as in the small gestures of friendliness, bursts of laughter and signs of hope that spring forth and multiply now and then in the life of the squat, like flowers in the wilderness.
Monday, August 28th.
Out all day. When I came back in the evening, I found that somebody had had the nerve to take a shit on my sleeping bag. There's no lock on the door, but this is the first time I'm the victim of any kind of vandalism. Apparently something similar happened to Richard a couple of days ago, and I'm quite certain that none of this is deliberate provocation. With the toilets out of order at the moment, no functioning public toilets in the area after dark, and the pubs refusing to let you have a pee without buying a drink, it's hardly a surprise to find excrements in the most unexpected places. During the day, I had the chance to talk with Dan Martin from Catholic Peace Action about the response of various institutions dealing with homelessness in London to the existence of the squat. Apparently, the squat often arouses feelings of indifference, scepticism, or even rejection in those circles. These feelings were particularly strong at the beginning when charitable institutions were suspiciously waiting to see what our direct action tactics would produce. There was greater enthusiasm after our project received wide recognition, but still mixed with a good deal of grumbling. According to Dan, the reservations that can be heard are concerned with the illegal nature of the occupation, the failure to provide a long-term solution, and to the problem of homelessness and the lack of organisation. Also, some people, he said, feel that it would be wrong to support the occupation of a dilapidated building in which they would not like to live themselves. Why the remedy should take the particular form of homeless people leaving the squat rather than of well-housed people resolving to join it, I don't know.
Tuesday, August 29th.
This morning I found Sarah talking with Sandy on the staircase. She said that Sandy wanted to commit suicide and had already taken a number of drugs and tranquilizers. Apparently Shorty, Sandy's boyfriend, had left her, and on top of that she's pregnant. A little later, Sarah told me that Sandy was on the roof and threatening to jump. I went out and saw Sandy sitting on the edge of the roof, 30 feet above my head, with her feet dangling in the air. While I was climbing on the fire escape near the roof, I had the fright of my life. I heard a sound resembling that of a body hitting the floor. And when I looked up, she wasn't there anymore. Fortunately, she had not jumped, but only moved to the other side of the roof. I talked with her for a while. Then we were joined by two of her friends. who also tried to reason with her. Finally, Max decreed that all this was nonsense and pure attention seeking, and walked away with the other friend. I followed him sheepishly, but Max was not entirely wrong, because a few minutes later Sandy was back in the building, wandering around and threatening to put an end to her life, but not doing much about it. Finally, she bundled her belongings and resolutely left the squat. Shorty is staying, but we will miss her. In the afternoon, I helped Arthur clear the backyard, and we were occasionally helped by others as well. It's interesting that, like Graham, Arthur too can be seen to carry on doing his bit in spite of all his bitter comments about the hopelessness of the place. Mind you, his work was punctuated with grumbles and gentle sarcasms, and he insisted that he was doing this purely out of shame about the sight of the backyard and what the neighbours would think about us. But that is what he said, and even what he said reveals some concern for our image as a community. Among other things that came up in the conversation, Arthur mentioned that Og was his worst enemy, that he was a crook with a lot to answer for, and he was furious that Og had had the guts to come back. I didn't probe these statements, but it seems that I'm not the only one disturbed by Og's return. At dinner time, there was an intense debate about the gloomy future of our present living arrangements. The system of rent collection seems to be under severe strain, with only 10 people having paid their rent this week. To be fair to those who don't pay, I should mention a number of them do so without any malice and without making a secret of it. They consider, quite plausibly, that it's perfectly legitimate to stay in the squat for free, as long as one doesn't take meals. Some of those who don't pay, like Nick, have suggested in past meetings that there should be a lower rate, say £2 a week, for those who don't take meals, but this suggestion has not been adopted thus far. This being said, it's hard to run a communal kitchen if only 10 people contribute, and if another 5 or 10 try to wangle free meals. So a breakdown of the system of cooking and rent collection is a real possibility, and this is causing much agitation. Peter looks more preoccupied than ever and often gets very moody. The crunch came when Pauline lashed out at him. She argued that, contrary to what Peter claimed, Craig, that's her boyfriend, had paid his rent, and she went on to accuse Peter of being a liar and even of using the rent to go to the pub. This absurd accusation was too much for Peter, who shouted back for a while, but finally walked out in disgust. Meanwhile, I can't help but feel that Og is waiting on the sideline for an opportunity to take over. According to Dave, he's been going around trying to persuade various people that we need a committee to run this place as in the good old days. And after Steve commented today that you can't force people to pay their rent, can you? Og laconically replied, "You can." Is it a coincidence that Pauline is one of the few people that Og has converted to the idea of a committee? Our only chance is that, apart from Pauline, whose self-image as leader has been regularly frustrated, and a few others, most people in the squat are actually quite clear that a committee is out of the question, and that they prefer to remain free and equal. But then, again, Og has more than one trick up his sleeves.
Wednesday, August the 30th.
The atmosphere of breakdown which crept in yesterday took a turn for the worse, with lunch being cancelled due to financial bankruptcy. Dave bravely managed to put some dinner together later on, but then declared that he was resigning from his kitchen duties. Peter hasn't come back since he walked out yesterday. In the evening we had a meeting. Given the events of the last few days, it was clear that this would be a crucial moment, and I was encouraged to find that, unlike last week, the attendance was excellent. I went around the whole building knocking on doors to announce the meeting, and almost everyone present came, which was about 30 people. The last door I knocked on was that of Og's room, and I was greatly relieved when he bluntly refused to come. For a moment I hoped that my fears were just unjustified, and that he wasn't taking much interest in the management of the squat after all. This euphoria was not to last long. Dave asked me to chair the meeting, but I declined, replying that anyone should be allowed to volunteer to chair. This perfectionism was a real mistake, because the effect was that before the issue could be resolved, the meeting took off on its own without a chairperson and quickly degenerated into chaos. The lack of direction, the large attendance, the tension generated by recent events, and the burning nature of the agenda, especially the fate of the cooking and rent collection system, combined to prevent any coherent discussion from taking place. Max, who'd had a drink and has quite a big mouth even when he's sober, shouted a lot, and his behaviour gradually contaminated others. After an inconclusive shouting match about the question of rent dodging, and in spite of the fact that in the middle of this all some good points were made, people started gradually walking out until I was left with Richard and a few others. A real disaster. I left too, disheartened. Perhaps Arthur is right, I thought. Perhaps this place is full of shit. Perhaps I'm kidding myself in thinking that there is anything new, anything cheerful, anything promising, anything revolutionary, anything significant about this whole experiment. Perhaps it is just an entirely familiar and predictable story of inertia, chaos, selfishness, corruption and misery. Before leaving, I'm going away for 3 days, I casually asked Dave what was happening to the kitchen. He said that he'd already handed over the keys to Barbara. I couldn't put a face on that name immediately, but I remembered later that she was Og's girlfriend.
Thursday, August 31st.
Away.
Friday, September the 1st.
Away.
Saturday, September the 3rd. 2nd.
Came back to number 1 Clapham Road in the early evening after 3 days of absence. As often, when I've been away for any length of time, I couldn't help feeling a little anxious and wondering whether I would find the place burnt to the ground, or that someone had been killed, or everyone evicted. But things seemed extraordinarily normal when I arrived. The gate was neither locked nor guarded, the premises were tidy, and everything was calm. The only evidence of any change was the presence of a tray full of sand on the first landing, with a ferocious notice urging dog owners to train their dogs to shit in the tray rather than all over the corridors. Home sweet home. But soon I found out that things were a bit too calm. Nothing much has been happening since Peter walked through the door and Dave resigned. No rent is being collected. The kitchen doesn't function anymore, and I can sense that many people are demoralised. I talked with Dave, who brought me up to date. He said that the police had been round. I'm not sure why, but also that some people from the council had come with plans for improving the building, but that these plans were probably, I quote, not for us. That the place would most likely be closed down before Christmas, that the churches had received £3,000 for us, but that they had decided to return this money because the place was in a mess, that the Simon community was withholding food deliveries for the same reason, and a number of other things, the refrain of which was that the place was doomed because we had no organisation. It didn't take me long to figure out that a lot of this nonsense came straight from Og. Dave confirmed that Og had been going around telling people that we needed a committee to run the place and spreading these absurd rumours, according to which the council, the church and the Simon community wouldn't help us until we had one. I was pleased to hear from Dave that there was in fact a lot of resistance to the idea of a committee and that people wanted things to stay exactly as they were. The first thing to do to cheer ourselves up and to prevent the re-emergence of authoritarian rule is to get the kitchen going again. Unfortunately, it's Barbara, Og's girlfriend, who has the keys to the kitchen storeroom. In the evening, I went through Waterloo again and talked about the squat to a middle-aged man who was begging there with the familiar "homeless and hungry, please help" placard. He was quite enthusiastic. So were two men and a woman who were sitting a little further on a bench, drinking and arguing. If we can get the squat back on its feet, it will be easy to recruit many new members, but first we need to sort ourselves out. We have no excuse for failing to enable people who live on the street to come and make themselves comfortable in our home. As one of the banners we had put up on the first day said, "Empty property is theft."
Sunday, September the 3rd.
When I came down in the morning, I found the kitchen in a terrible mess. There was rubbish all over the place, including lots of cans of beer and empty bottles. A number of things had disappeared, including the gas stove, and the door of the storeroom had been kicked in. I decided to take this opportunity to clean everything up and put a new padlock on the storeroom. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a suitable padlock, and nor could I buy one since it was Sunday. I have to get a padlock first thing tomorrow morning, and hope that Og and Barbara are not conspiring to do the same. Tim Saylor, who now goes to Mass every Sunday at St. Mark's next door, dropped in with his new wife Stephanie and her daughter. He was wearing a cowboy hat and went around the building with the assurance of a property manager. He went on about how we should do this and that and took a particularly careful look at the generators, claiming that he could fix them in no time with only £100. An electrician assured me a month later that these generators were entirely useless. It wasn't clear from his behaviour whether he was just giving us some friendly advice or whether he was preparing to come back and take over again. I had a friendly chat with him, though I couldn't help being slightly put off by his behaviour. Spent some time cleaning and mopping. There were few people around. I wondered whether it was worth doing it on my own, whether I was giving people a chance to get away with doing nothing or giving them an example which they would follow sooner or later. I didn't seem to get much of a following, and after scrubbing half of the backyard I decided to go and have a nap and see what would happen. After I woke up I found the whole of the backyard neat and tidy. Well, this was heartening, but I shouldn't give the impression that it always happens like this. Sometimes you can go on working for quite a long time without any sign that anyone is inspired to help. This is why a lot of people give up participating in cleaning after a while. They say, "Why should I clean other people's shit day after day if they don't do anything about it?" And then their own despondency eventually infects the newcomers, who are usually full of goodwill. Fortunately, there are waves of enthusiasm from time to time when a few people get together and pick up brushes and mops, and then other people join in. And of course, there have been times when we all agree at a meeting that such and such day will be cleaning day, and that often works. The backyard being cleaned was not the only sign that the squat was coming back to life. In the absence of the gas stove, a little fire had been lit in a can in the open air, and there were people sitting around sipping tea and chatting. I was among them when Ian McGowan turned up and told us with some anxiety that Tim Saylor had told everyone at St. Mark's that he was about to take over again at the Belgrave, and that he would come tomorrow at 6 p.m. and call a meeting to talk to us. Tim had already rallied some support from those among us who go to Mass at St. Mark's on Sunday and hang around there afterwards to get a good meal. Today they included Og, who used to be Tim's right-hand man, and who took the opportunity to make the further absurd claim that the delicious food that was served by St. Mark's had been delivered by the Simon community and was originally intended for us. The news of Tim's second coming caused consternation among those who have already experienced his regime. A few of them do support him, like Bobby and Rachel, but many others said that there was no question of him taking over again, and even that he would not be allowed through the door. There seems to be enough opposition to resist a coup, but Tim is clever, and those who don't know him could easily be taken for a ride.
Monday, September the 4th.
A hectic day. Since I came nearly a month ago, I've avoided taking too many leading initiatives, preferring to let things take their own course and to help in small ways as and when the opportunity arises. But with the void created by Peter's departure and Dave's resignation and Og and Tim's apparent machinations to restore their authority, I felt that in the circumstances there was a need to get up and do something. As soon as the hardware store around the corner opened, I bought a padlock and put it on the kitchen storeroom. Then I started reorganising the kitchen with John and Richard. I got in touch with Nancy Kershaw and other members of their support network and made sure that there would be food in the kitchen every day this week in spite of the temporary breakdown of the rent collection system. Then I did some running around to find out what exactly was the position regarding garbage removal, electricity, the council's plans, etc. I knew that if he did come in the evening and called a meeting, Tim would try to persuade people that without him they're in a soup, and I wanted to be able to dispel that impression. I was particularly concerned about a current rumour that the council would not go ahead with its plans of improving the building until we had organised ourselves and formed a committee. This, I was told, was what two representatives of the Department of Environmental Health and Consumer Services, that's the DEHCS, had said. I went to see Arnold Porter at DEHCS, and we had a long and very helpful chat. As I expected, their request has nothing to do with the internal management of the squat. What they want is some kind of spokesperson or persons with whom they can liaise. Like all the institutions, they find it hard to deal with a constantly fluctuating group of people who have no leader, no committee, no constitution, no office, no headed paper. Arnold told me that his two representatives had submitted a very critical report about the squat. I'm not surprised. They must have slipped on some dog shit somewhere and concluded that the whole place was a total disaster. What I mean is that it's hard to get an even remotely accurate idea of what goes on here from a quick visit. We also discussed the fire safety situation, which, for me, has always been a cause of concern. I thought the best thing to do would be to invite the fire brigade to inspect the building and ask for their advice on simple fire protection measures. But Arnold panicked when he heard this, warned me that the fire brigade had very strong powers and could close the building, and thought it was best to keep quiet. Back at the squat, I was glad to find the kitchen bustling with activity and a splendid curry being prepared. I thought it would be good to get Marianne involved again and went to ask her for her help, but I found her in a disconsolate mood and she said, "No, I'm not doing anything anymore. The place is going to close down soon. We'll never get the kitchen going again." Tim Saylor and his wife Stephanie arrived at 6 p.m. as announced. By that time we were all enjoying a good meal, and the pit from which Tim was supposed to rescue us was already beginning to look less deep and less dark. He started lecturing a few of us, telling them what a mess the place was, how people used to get 3 cooked meals a day and watch TV in the evening when he was in charge, and other predictable stories. His eloquence obviously made an impression, and I began to fear that he was going to have things his way. All along, he was actively assisted by Og. Tim called a meeting. I was worried that the few of us who knew Tim and could see through his smooth talk were proposing to boycott this meeting, and that this would make it even easier for Tim to rally the others behind him, but eventually they did come. The attendance was tremendous. Tim was initially in good form and explained how he used to be in charge, how things were much better at that time, and how he had been away temporarily but was now coming back. As usual, it is extremely frustrating to hear him take everybody for a ride without being able to challenge him effectively. However, I did take the opportunity to correct him from time to time, in particular when he claimed that the council wanted to have someone, I quote, in authority to act as a representative. Little by little, Tim lost ground. There was vigorous opposition to anyone being in authority, whether a committee or an individual. I don't think that Tim expected any of this, and at some point he sat down and kept silent for a long time while people were hotly debating the whole situation. Often he does this and then gets up and tells people that they're wasting their time shouting at each other and that they should listen to him. And it works. But this time, he got up. It was mainly to say that he had to go, and he was always ready to help, and that if we needed him, we only had to call him. Then he and Stephanie promptly left. Og looked discomfited. Tim's early capitulation greatly surprised me. Later I was told by Ian McGowan that Tim himself was not so keen to take charge of the squat again, but that it was his wife Stephanie and some other people from St Mark's who were pushing him hard to do so. Apparently they had, for God knows what reason, convinced him that he had a divine mission to be the leader of the squat. All this may explain why he gave up so easily. Anyway, I never saw him again. The meeting continued, chaired by John. It was quite chaotic and unproductive. At one stage, a brief attempt was made to elect some kind of spokesperson to liaise with the council. Muzzy got up and asked who would volunteer, and 4 people raised their hand: Rachel, Bobby, Scum, and Dave. Muzzy asked who voted for Rachel, and no one did. Then he asked who voted for Bobby, and no one did. Scum was no less fortunate. Only I voted for Dave. That was the end of the matter. Then the discussion drifted to the eternal problem of whether and how to collect the rent. We were getting nowhere, and the meeting was going to be closed until Adam and Julian volunteered out of the blue to collect the rent, and everyone agreed. A last-minute decision was also taken to draw £80 from our account and use it to buy some cleaning material and pay a bill of £28 that has just arrived from the water board. I've tried to summarise as fairly as possible a long meeting which was the theatre of complex power politics. I may be paranoid, but I do think that we have narrowly avoided a coup by Tim and Og. And I'm also convinced that whatever their personal motives are, the kind of authoritarian regime that they want to impose in the squat is not what people really want and what makes them happy. If I've tried so hard to resist Tim and Og's conspiracy, it's not because I want to impose my own view of how this squat should be organised. It's because past experiences at number 1 Clapham Road have shown how easily people can be taken for a ride, and because I felt it was important they should be able to make an informed choice. I'm not surprised that they've opted for freedom and equality rather than for 3 cooked meals a day and TV. After the meeting, there was the usual atmosphere of excitement and new start. Adam and Julian broke into the small office in which Peter used to collect the rent and keep the accounts, and they started making elaborate preparations for their new job. But I'm not very optimistic that they're going to get very far. Julian is one of the most emotionally fragile people among us, both physically and psychologically, and I doubt that he will stand the strain for more than a few days. Adam is more robust, but he does not command anywhere near the respect that Peter used to enjoy, and I'd be surprised if many people were happy to entrust him with their money. We will probably be back to square one very soon.
Tuesday, September the 5th.
Spent quite a bit of time cleaning up the ground floor in the morning. This time I was immediately joined by Bill, a real dosser who moved in recently. I think that when it comes to participation in domestic chores, there are really 4 kinds of people here. There are the dedicated idiots, like Peter, Richard, Dave and me, who will keep working no matter what other people do. Then there are those who are willing to work as long as other people work too, and who trust that others will work and therefore are willing to give it at least a try. There are those who are not willing to work because they don't trust that others will work, and they are not prepared to let anyone take advantage of them. And finally, there's the tiny majority of free riders who don't care a damn and are just not interested in helping because they see that they can get away with it. Found Adam crying. His girlfriend Petra, a German girl who came here a few weeks ago, went back to Germany. He says that she left because Mel, who has a chronic tendency to bully people and crack lousy jokes, made some racist remarks about Germans which upset Petra. On top of this, Adam said that he had been threatened after asking someone to pay his rent. He resigned from his new responsibility and went to join the anti-apartheid picket in Trafalgar Square for a change. Today was Craig's birthday. Pauline, his girlfriend, organised a party for him, and it was beautiful to see Craig's friends decorating the common room, giving him birthday cards and getting goodies, including, of course, a lot of booze, for the party. We collected some money and bought a big chocolate cake. A friend of Craig came and played the guitar. The party, which lasted from 6 in the evening until 6 in the morning, was absolutely wild.
Wednesday, September the 6th.
Found Julian in a state this morning. Even in ordinary times he tends to be quite neurotic and depressive, but now that he has to collect the rent and that Adam has abandoned him, he's more difficult than ever. It was a warm day, and I later found him sunbathing in the middle of Kennington Park, wearing nothing but tiny swimming trunks. We talked. Deluded artist and tormented homosexual, Julian gets depressed in the squat and finds the company very alienating because people don't like his pronounced public school accent and because there is no one to talk to about Proust and Michelangelo. Spent some time cleaning in the morning. When I saw Bill, I assumed that he was going to help me again, but instead he angrily shouted something about the fact that some people here were making a mess while others did all the hard work. However, it was encouraging to see that several people whom I had never seen help him before were working hard. And once again I found Arthur quietly doing his bit in spite of his misgivings. Perhaps deep inside he still wants this place to work. The kitchen is back on its feet, partly thanks to the help of the supporters, particularly Nancy Kershaw. For the time being, I'm hanging on to the key, though I hope at the next meeting someone will be chosen to take care of the kitchen. After the evening meal, I had a long chat with Arthur, Mike, Richard, and a new guy called Paul. Eddie, the old man who gets up early in the morning to keep the gate and make tea, was also there, just watching. At one point, a terrific quarrel erupted between Arthur and Mike, who are, for some reason, bitter enemies. They were shouting at each other and threatening to get at each other's throats, and none of us knew what to do when Eddie suddenly said, "May I say something?" and then told Mike that a letter had arrived for him. Mike was surprised and asked where the letter had come from, and Eddie replied cheekily, "From France. A French letter." Everybody laughed, and that was the end of the quarrel. We switched to an impassioned exchange of political views led by Richard, which went on well into the night. Later I went out and only came back at 3 in the morning. I found Richard at the gate doing a night shift on his own. We spent an hour sitting there together, gazing at the cars and the few passers-by and the stars shining behind, sharing about our lives and our ideas and our dreams. He told me some unbelievably funny stories about his recent activities as a revolutionary anarchist, fly posting against the poll tax, spraying slogans on military bases and sabotaging meat delivery trucks. I remember particularly a very moving story about how he had saved a fox during a hunt sab, how he had literally panicked at the thought that the poor fox would be torn to shreds by a horde of dogs, and how he had kept them away by gesticulating and screaming at the top of his voice until the fox was safe. And there was an even more poignant and revealing story about how he was walking down Whitechapel Road one day with some leaflets and a loaf of bread, and suddenly he sees this old tramp lying in the middle of a rubbish tip covered with scabs, and he goes straight to the poor old man and gives him half of the loaf of bread. And as he does this, he notices a Rolls Royce parked nearby. "I will never forget this vision," he says. "The old tramp lying on the rubbish with a lifeless look, and the Rolls Royce in the background." Richard never ceases to amaze me. He's widely regarded in the squat as being half-witted, and it's true that sometimes he does act quite daft, as when he mops the floor, he only uses one hand and has disastrous results. He throws whole carrots in the stew, uses water as black as ink to do the washing up, or goes from here to the Aldwych via London Bridge in spite of having a map. His stammering, his giant body mounted on flat feet, his epileptic fits and his obsessive concern with food haven't helped in dispelling his image of harmless simpleton. Even I profoundly misunderstood him at the beginning, but now I know that his rough manners hide a sharp mind and a golden heart. He has very coherent political views, as I've already explained. He's always ready to help and works like a dog, cleaning entire wings of the building in his spare time. He has no sense of property, and when by chance he gets hold of a loaf of bread or a jar of peanut butter, he immediately shares it with everyone and anyone. He keeps his own bicycle on the ground floor unlocked, ready for anyone to use. Does he or does he not realise that sooner or later the bicycle is bound to disappear? Since he came here a few weeks ago, he's been going around without a penny. He's making his first social security claim. He's hungry half of the time, more often than not without a shirt. When the flaming money comes," he says, "I will pig myself silly." Richard is one of the most colourful and engaging characters living at number 1 Clapham Road. But there's another reason why I'm so fond of him. I've often thought that what this squat needed most to survive and be a success was not money or publicity or organisation, but a few more dedicated and clear-headed members, people who would make constructive suggestions at the weekly meetings, spread a spirit of cooperation, comfort those who are depressed, volunteer to clean the dog shit, help to resolve conflicts without violence. And I've often thought about the revolutionaries, the anarchists, the Christians, the idealists, the pacifists, whom one might have expected to see flocking here, because utopia is happening here every day, because the gospel is happening here every day, because non-violence is tested here every day. And I've wondered, where is everybody? Well, at least Richard was here, and he was here because he was homeless. Today, Steve got married.